We mentioned earlier that the purpose of our bioenergetic pathways or our energy systems is to produce what's called a usable form of energy. So in these next couple of slides, we're going to talk about what exactly this usable form of energy is. For the most part, when we're talking about a usable form of energy in this class, we'll be talking about a molecule called ATP. So ATP is probably something that you've heard of before. It's known in most science books as the universal energy donor. And it's essentially the most important energy carrying molecule in the cell. However, it's really important to note that ATP is not the only energy carrier that we have in the body. As you'll see on the next couple of slides, there are a few more that you should be familiar with. They'll come up a couple of different times later on in this chapter and throughout the semester. So to start us off, how do we make ATP and how do we break down ATP in order to release the energy that it contains? On this slide, I have some really simple explanations of how that works. You'll see as we move through this chapter that everything is not quite as simple as it is on this slide, but this will kind of give you the gist of what's going on. So to start off, we have a molecule called ADP. I like to think of ADP as an uncharged AA battery. When we're synthesizing ATP, ADP reacts with inorganic phosphate to form ATP, or a charged AA battery. So if you look at the figure on the right, we have a molecule of ADP, and then an inorganic phosphate molecule comes in, attaches to the end of the ADP to form ATP. When we're breaking down ATP, we start with a molecule of ATP. That ATP gets split into ADP and inorganic phosphate, and that process is going to release energy. So we're going from a charged ATP battery to an uncharged ADP battery. So I mentioned that there are other energy carriers. The other energy carriers that we'll talk about in this class are a molecule called GTP, a molecule called NADH, and a molecule called FADH2. And I like to think of these as batteries as well. So the molecule GTP is structurally very similar to ATP. So anytime you see GTP, just cross out the G and put an A and think, okay, this is ATP. Because these two molecules are so similar, I think of them both as AA batteries. Our next energy carrier molecule is a molecule called NADH. So NADH is not an energy carrier that can be used directly to power cell work or to power muscular contraction, but the energy contained in NADH can be transferred to ATP, as you'll see later on in our electron transport chain talk. So NADH through the electron transport chain can be used to produce 2.5 ATP. So I think of NADH as a bigger battery than ATP. So we'll say NADH is a D battery. Our last energy carrier molecule is a molecule called FADH2. So FADH2, again, can't be used to power cell work directly, but it can be used to produce more ATP through the electron transport chain. FADH2 is only going to produce 1.5 ATP. And so I think of this as a C battery, so a little bit smaller than a D, but bigger than an A. Really important to keep in mind that the body can only use AA batteries for the most part. So the energy that's in the other battery types, so NADH or FADH2, needs to get converted into the AA type or ATP in order to get used for cell work or for muscular contraction.